Hello and welcome to Future Squared. Stephen Hawking once said that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, so let's adapt. My name is Steve Glaveski, and each week I'll bring you conversations with preeminent thought leaders from a variety of fields to help you think in a multidisciplinary way, keep goals in your professional and personal life, and better navigate what is fast becoming a brave, new world. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation accelerator that works with organizations to unlock their people's latent potential to create more impact for humanity and lead more fulfilling lives. If you need help driving your organization's innovation strategy, visit collectivecampus.io. And without further ado,
come with me if you want to live.
Welcome back to Future Squared for a bonus episode with the Millennial Mastermind, Brad Mulvey. Brad is the founder of Millennial Mastermind and host of the Millennial Mastermind Podcast. His mission is to build a community of highly motivated millennials who want to build amazing lives for themselves and each other. By connecting with the already successful, Brad is digging into their journeys and uncovering the proven strategies that they use to achieve massive success. In doing so, Brad shares with his audience their formula for success. We discussed a number of topics in this show, but specifically millennials. Talking about 1, why millennials are the participation trophy generation and how to get around this. 2, weaknesses and strengths that millennials embody and how to best circumvent or leverage these in the workplace. And 3, what Brad learned interviewing the CEO of his company, Speedeon Data. With that, enjoy my conversation with Brad Mulvey. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Hey, welcome. Saying welcome. Usually I'm the one welcoming people. But thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here, Steve. I appreciate you having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. And I know what it's like to normally be on the other side of the microphone and then suddenly be on the receiving end and being the one asked all the questions. It does take a little bit of adjusting. So we'll cut you some slack on that one, mate.
Much appreciated, brother.
So you're joining us all the way from Cleveland, Ohio, rather. And I know you're a massive Cleveland sports fan. I mean, how do you feel about the prodigal son, LeBron James, leaving for the second time?
Well, it was a lot less bitter this time around, to be honest with you. I think the first time people weren't expecting it. The way that it was done was a little bit hurtful to the people around here. And I think it's really a good lesson in just the way that you treat people and treat the people you care about. And the way that that's approached can make all the difference. I mean, the first time around, even his best friends in the organization of the Cleveland Cavaliers didn't know he was leaving. And they found out at the exact same I did, which is kind of crazy. So that's why I think there are a lot of hard feelings there, and it was done on national TV and things like that. Yeah. But this time, it was a whole different situation, and you could just see the people of Cleveland were much more amicable about it. And so, just the way that you deliver bad news can make all the difference.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a valuable lesson in that for employees at organizations who perhaps are looking to navigate a move away. Just keep that conversation transparent. I mean, in some organizations, it may not be an easy conversation to have, depending on how emotionally intelligent people are and the culture of the organization. But more often than not, if you are transparent, then it doesn't seem like a ton of bricks is just being dropped on an organization when you do say, hey, actually, I'm leaving and here's my 2-week notice.
Yeah. And you're an entrepreneur, so you obviously know things go wrong all the time in business and in life, and being able just to navigate those with a positive mindset and without really burning bridges and hurting the people around you makes all the difference in the overall happiness of your life, from my perspective, at least. Could
not agree more with that, Brad. So just to give our audience a little bit more perspective on who Brad Mulvey is and what you do, perhaps give us the 2,000-foot, 30-second view of who you are and what you're currently working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the host of the Millennial Mastermind Podcast, which is a personal development platform for entrepreneurial millennials who are looking for tools, tactics, inspiration to take their business ownership dreams and make those a reality. So that's my big project at the moment. It's a side hustle. I also maintain a 9-to-5 sales job, and so happy to talk through some of the side hustle aspects of my life as well.
Yeah.
But it's been a fun journey.
Fantastic. And I mean, what essentially inspired the development of that podcast? Because like in my case, when I first set up the Future Squared podcast, initially it was about marketing, but it's gone on to be about so much more. I mean, what was that initial sort of seed of an idea of inspiration that got you to start the Millennial Mastermind podcast, which now is about 130 episodes in?
Yeah, it was really coming from a place of desperation, to be completely honest. And it was as in a job that I didn't feel fulfilled in. I didn't feel like I was living up to my potential. I was driving an hour each way to get to and from that job, and listening to a ton of podcasts. And that's when I really fell in love with the personal development space, entrepreneurial podcasts, and started reading the books, the Think and Grow Riches, following the Tim Ferrisses of the world. And I realized that I couldn't find anybody who was going through my exact struggle, who was putting content out there that I could really relate to. And so that's when I decided to give it a shot, throw my hat in there, see what I can do on the podcasting stage. And, like many things, it started as just a giant cluster, and I had no idea what I was doing, but slowly but surely started to build up those interview skills, started attracting bigger names and interviewing folks who really had incredible stories. And from there, like you said, we're at 130 episodes and almost 3 years in, which is just unbelievable.
Yeah. And that's one thing I absolutely despise, long drives, but they're made just a little bit sweeter when I can listen to a podcast on double speed and learn something on that long drive.
Yep.
So with respect to starting the podcast, and now I understand you've also created a mastermind group, which you've just launched that as well. Would you say that part of it was wanting to surround yourself with a disparate set of ideas and people who could bring you up? Because for a lot of us who may be working, say, in a large organization, we may be surrounded by people who, while they have their ambitions, while they may be good people, perhaps they're just not the type of people who are into the same kinds of things, are as ambitious as us, and will perhaps not bring us up to a level that we need to be at in order to move towards our goals. Was that part of it? Like surrounding yourself with as Jim Rohn said, you are some of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yeah, no, 100%. It was just as you kind of talked through that, it really just strikes home with me, because I was in that position where I was working at a good organization. Really, it was good company and good people, but they didn't share the same aspirations that I did of business ownership, of creating my own thing in entrepreneurship. And the thing with that was just that I recognized, based on what I was hearing on all these podcasts I was listening to, that if I wasn't surrounded by people who were doing the things that I wanted to do, or already had, better yet, that it would be such an uphill battle to get there. And so that was definitely a piece of it. Starting the podcast, it gave me a platform to start interviewing people that were light years ahead of me. So there was that piece right off the bat, that all of a sudden people who previously may have never answered my email or picked up my phone call had a reason to talk to me. And I had that incentive to get them on the line and start building those relationships. But then also with the mastermind group that you mentioned, that was a piece of it that was also really started to grow organically, first with just one of my friends, as we were accountability partners. We were chatting on the phone at 7 a.m. every Monday morning. But then I had some listeners of the show who started reaching out and asking if there was any other ways that they could get involved with me, if there's any other ways that they could start tracking towards their own goals and go on this journey with me. And so the pieces came together to create a mastermind group in which, yes, a big piece of it is the accountability, but also it's bringing together 7 people every week who have different perspectives, or at different points in their entrepreneurial journeys. Some people have already started their companies, are a few years in, some people who are still trying to figure out what that idea is. But the common theme is that they all and myself included, share that drive. And it just gives us this support group and really this board of advisors that can talk about these dreams that we have and these entrepreneurial aspirations and projects, and have a place that we can talk openly and transparently about the things we're afraid of, the things that aren't going well, and share our wins too, and celebrate the awesome things that are happening, which is just as important. But oftentimes you may not just get that with your normal coworkers or your normal friend group that you're going and having a few beers with on the weekend. And I know that was the case for me. I didn't necessarily have that type of mentality around me. And so I had to intentionally go out and create it, which was definitely a big piece of both the podcast and the mastermind group.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think having a support group not only is beneficial when things are going well, but perhaps a lot more so when things aren't going so well. And as someone who was a solopreneur for about a year, having someone to share your struggles with, and someone to say, yeah, I went through that as well. And to know that that's basically part of the journey, will keep you on that track longer than if you felt like you were on this journey all alone and it was really difficult and dark and the walls seem to be caving in on you. I think when you do have that support group, it makes it much easier to play the long game and just realize that while these troughs of sorrow, as they're called, it's just part of the game. And if nothing, you may even take some energy and enthusiasm out of those troughs of sorrow, because really entrepreneurship is very much about having a healthy relationship with that adversity that you will no doubt encounter.
Yeah, absolutely. And also another piece of it too is just having a place where people can challenge you on your thinking. If you'd ever join a mastermind group, or if you're a part of one, it may not happen overnight, but if you have if you foster this space where you not only allow but encourage people to challenge your thinking, and you're challenging there, but in a safe and constructive way, then all of a sudden you might think you're in one of those good places and that you're on the right track. And then somebody asks you a damn hard question that you didn't see coming that really challenges your whole perspective on a situation that at first, sure, might be a gut check and might have you on the defensive. I can definitely speak from experience there. But opens your eyes to maybe a weak point in your approach or just something you weren't thinking of. So there's so many benefits of it that I can go on and on about it, but it's definitely something that anybody who is an entrepreneur or thinking about entrepreneurship, or even if you're not and your interests lie elsewhere, finding a group like that is applicable to what it is that your goals are aligned with. Definitely. I think it's very, very key.
Yeah. And just speaking of having people challenge your assumptions and beliefs, I think in any creative pursuit that is so true. I mean, you look at Pixar, and they have the brain trust, which essentially meets, I think on a monthly basis whenever they're working on a script for a movie or whether in production. And they just bring people together to share the honest feedback without fear of reprisal or recourse. And Ed Catmull, one of the founders over at Pixar, basically credits that with some of their best movies, because without that healthy discourse, and if you have an environment where people are scared to say what they really think, or if you have an environment where people's first assumptions are not challenged, and then you essentially have what is a really untested version of a product go to market that more often than not just doesn't resonate with people.
Preach, brother. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So having hosted the podcast, you're 130 lessons in. What would you say some of your key learnings have been? Not necessarily a single isolated learning, but more so pattern recognition. Because I find that having interviewed over 100 people as well on my podcast, there's certain things that come up again and again and again when I'm speaking to these high performers, whether they're in entrepreneurship, whether they're academics, authors, neuroscientists, you name it. Have there been any common patterns that you've observed through your conversations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the thing that immediately jumps into my mind is that no matter what industry different guests and authors and entrepreneurs have been that I've talked to, they've all somewhat categorized themselves in a people-based business and a people-based industry. And that may be the people that they're working with and the team that they're developing, or the people that they're selling to, their customers, but really looking at those as individuals and not just as dollar signs and numbers,
right,
on the other side of a report. And that mindset has been something that I thought that I had, but then I commonly find myself tripped up in. And the podcast is a perfect example of, you record an episode, you put it out, and then you see the statistics of how that episode's performing, who's listening to it. You can see if people are commenting, things like that. But really, when you just go to your dashboard, you see how many downloads were there. And it's super easy to forget, whether for me it's the podcast or whether it's sales, that those are people on the other side of that dashboard. And those are individuals who are going on and listening to it, and just remembering to cater to their needs and not just play this numbers game, because it seems that the people who have had the most success have been the ones who have focused on people. And that's also the case just with building their teams, as I mentioned, and really focusing on employees and the folks around them, as well as the people that they're touching on the customer side.
Yeah, it's funny though, paradoxically though, when we have a small group of people, it's easy to see everyone as a human being, as a person with feelings and emotions and everything else. But when that number balloons out to, say, thousands and thousands of listeners, and you might jump into your podcast dashboard and you'll see 10,000 listens to this episode, or whatever the case may be, it's much harder to keep the fact that these are all individual people in perspective. I mean, how do you manage that as that number gets bigger and bigger?
So for me, it's staying with the case studies. And what I mean by that is one thing that I do on my podcast is every several episodes, I'll throw a call to action at the end of it of giving people the opportunity to schedule a 15-minute call with me. And so it's just a basic Calendly link that they go on, and they can book a time slot. And those calls turn out to be the most impactful thing when it comes to my motivation and my direction with the podcast, because it gives me the opportunity to really get insight into a listener's world, and hearing if I've had some sort of positive impact on them is just extremely motivating for me. But also understanding their struggles and the things that are keeping them up at night helps me to provide the right content. And then when I am having interviews with amazing guests, like we're going to be doing one with you here shortly, I can remember that, okay, I know exactly who's on the other side listening to this, whether it's Brian or Molly or whoever it may be. I can have them in my head rather than just throwing out content. And especially, so guest interviews are one piece, but if I do a solo episode, I can talk directly to those people as well. So that's the main thing that I do, is just really take those individual case studies, those conversations that I do have the opportunity to have, and really keep those front and center, because otherwise it's just all too easy to go down the data rabbit hole. Which I'm a data-driven type person, so it's particularly a tricky or a slippery slope.
You've got to push back against those cognitive biases that you've got. So, I mean, your podcast is called Millennial Mastermind, so it would be remiss of me not to talk about millennials. In your own observations and in your own work, I mean, how have you observed millennials different in what ways are millennials different, say, to Gen X and baby boomers? Some fundamental ways that you think they're different in terms of how they show up in the workplace.
Yeah, it's always interesting getting onto the millennial topic, because we are such a vast and diverse group. But I think one thing is that there is just so much more distraction in today's world wasn't necessarily there. So it's pretty easy to find those case studies of millennials and frankly, any generation who are those lazy individuals that oftentimes we get the bad rep for, who just do want to go home and play video games all day, or who are just have their faces buried in their phone. However, I think that it also provides both millennial employees and employers a really great opportunity to find those differentiated cases So finding those people who don't fall into that bucket and can successfully navigate this crazy world of distractions, and having grown up in that space too, finding those people who are really driven and can avoid some of the common pitfalls that may be out there is really just the low hanging fruit right now for both sides of the equation.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, oftentimes millennials are characterized as having, like you said, having their faces buried in their phones. They prefer, they want too much flexibility. They might have an 18-month to 24-month sort of tenure at an organization and spend a lot of time job hopping. But if you look at the other side of the coin in terms of strengths, obviously tech natives tend to be more emotionally intelligent. Not the case across the board, but I find on average that seems to be the case. And also purpose driven. For example, I've had no difficulty finding purpose driven millennials to work for my organization. Whereas it may be more challenging when I have conversations with people who maybe say Gen Xers or baby boomers. In some cases, what they tend to be driven by first and foremost is how much am I going to get paid? And that perhaps is a byproduct of the fact that they grew up 30 years ago, say, if I'm a baby boomer, in a time when it was very much about, survival. And I think with millennials, we're walking that line at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we have most of our bases covered. And so we want to learn how we can actually give back. And so purpose and doing something that actually gets us out of bed in the morning plays a much bigger role.
Yeah, totally agree. And then another one that comes to mind too is skill acquisition. We're just living in this world of podcast, YouTube, unlimited online resources where it's pretty easy to go out and acquire skill. For example, if you wanted to go out and launch a podcast, any average person, and I could say that because I'm a perfect example of that, can go out and learn the skills to launch a podcast without too much difficulty. Editing, all of the things that you need to do are right there at your fingertips. But one thing that is harder to do above the skill acquisition is the skill mastering. And that's a spot where if you can sell a millennial on that concept of not just coming in and learning a new skill and working at a year for it, but really going deep and show them the return on investment for mastering a skill that will pay dividends down the road, that's a position where then all of a sudden you really have something powerful to offer that individual, that they can see, okay, sticking with this and really mastering this is going to set me up for success in so many different ways. But again, it comes to thinking about people as people and what their goals are. And they probably do have bigger dreams and aspirations. And if you can just align your company's offering with that vision that they have and those aspirations that they have, then it's something that, again, can set companies apart.
Definitely. And I think, like I was saying, if you do away with just the extrinsic motivators like pay, bonuses, and things of that sort, the intrinsic motivators that Dan Pink speaks of in his book Drive were mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And that first piece, mastery, about learning and growth and development, aligns perfectly with what you've just said there. People want to, particularly millennials, they want to learn. They want to see that their skills are going to help them survive and thrive in what is essentially a fast-moving 21st century, where what you know today may be irrelevant tomorrow. And I think that's part of the thing that also sets millennials apart, is that adaptability, that comfort with ambiguity, to constantly be learning new things and to be able to better navigate that uncertainty that's essentially coming our way. But just on millennials, there's an author by the name of Bruce Tolgan who released a book called Not Everybody Gets a Trophy, which was a cheeky dig at the whole entitlement generation thing. And he basically suggested that millennials need strong, highly engaged managers. They need structure and boundaries. They need guidance, direction, support, and clear expectations. Would you agree with that or not so much?
You know what? I think I would. I think that when you say those things, I'm not familiar with his work, but it really makes me think of strong mentors. And if that's the type of strong folks that you have as managers and the structure that he's talking about, then that does ring a bell, because I think what oftentimes gets villainized as structure is really comes back to this idea that we're all comparing ourselves so much now, and social media has made that so easy that when you see your one friend who's working from home 3 days a week or working from the beach or something, I think that's where a lot of that desire for this flexibility comes from. And I'm totally in that boat. I love to have that flexibility, but I also like to have a little bit of structure. And if I'm not getting it from the workplace, I'm going to create it for myself. And so if a company has a vision for what that structure should look like, and they have a strong manager who can really get the employee or the millennial to buy into that on a deep fundamental level, then it's going to just create more success across the board and provide an opportunity for both sides of that employee and an employer relationship to be successful and happy.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, in my case, I'm a borderline millennial, having been born in 1983. But my first gig out of college was in a very unstructured new business unit at a large company, and I was promptly fired within 2 years of joining that organization. So there's one anecdotal confirming story as far as that structure and boundaries are concerned. And just wanted to touch on something real quick. I mean, you interviewed your CEO on your podcast. So that's the CEO of Speedeon Data. I'd love to understand what you actually learned from him, because obviously you're coming into the organization a little bit lower down the, shall we call it, the proverbial food chain. And you're speaking to someone who's done the work, they've got into that position of power. I mean, what were some of the key takeaways from that conversation that you can perhaps apply to your own work?
Yeah. Well, and one thing that I'll just mention before I get into that answer is that that's a perfect example of a strategic decision I made of I am working towards entrepreneurship, but moving towards an organization that more closely aligns with that. And so I had the opportunity to come on board here at a more entrepreneurial organization where they support things like me having this podcast and grabbing my CEO for an hour time slot in the middle of the day to do an interview like that. But one thing that I really took away from that was the importance of building key relationships, but not everybody's heard that, the importance of networking and having the right people in your corner. And we kind of talked about it a little bit with the mastermind group and things like that. But also maintaining those relationships over a long period of time. So Gerard Dare, who is the CEO at Speedeon, he didn't launch this business until he was 40 years old. And, you know, a lot of what we hear about today and the stories that are highlighted are these uber successful 20-some-year-old kids. But he was in a great career. He pursued further education at his MBA. And then launched that business at a later point in life when he had already started his family, things of that nature. And one of the things that really helped him to be successful were these relationships that he had been fostering for 20, 30 years. And a perfect example of that is that I think 3 of the members of the executive board at Speedeon, or 2 of them, and then he would be the 3rd, went to grade school with Gerard, and not even from this area in Cleveland, Ohio. They were from Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri. And he brought them all along for this crazy journey. And they're super talented, super skillful people who had highly respected jobs in large organizations. But the fact that he kept those relationships over all those years, he was able to pull them away and build just this amazing team, given the size of the company. And that was one piece that really blew me away is that, you know, he had classmates from his college years, his NBA post-grad years, and just jobs he's had where still to this day contribute to his business success in the company that he built. So just a powerful case study on the importance of not just forming relationships with people who can be helpful to you now, but keeping the relationships that you have alive and not letting those go to the wayside.
Yeah. Yeah. And also being deliberate about which relationships do you want to keep alive? Because I think it was Robin Dumba who came up with Dumbas number, which was 150, the number of individuals with whom any one person can maintain a stable relationship. So again, coming back to what we opened the conversation with, who are the people you can surround yourself with, or the networks you can build to help you move closer to your goals? Because you can build 150 lousy relationships that aren't going to be aligned with where you want to go, or be more deliberate about that and invest in the ones that you can turn to 5, 10, 15 years from now. And whether it's inviting them onto your board or perhaps leveraging that relationship in some other way, just being intentional about where you want to double down and perhaps where you want to move away, because we only have so many hours in the day.
Yeah, that's a great point. And cutting some of those relationships out, or at least spending less time on them, is a really hard thing to do. But when you do some of that deep reflection, it becomes quite apparent at times that there's a lot of relationships in your life that aren't serving you. So
yeah, and it can be quite difficult moving away from that, because many of us may hold on to relationships, say from high school, even, from college, where we were essentially friends because we lived around the corner from each other and we've known each other our whole lives, but we may end up walking very, very different paths. And before you know it, you're in your late 20s or your early 30s, and you are not literally, but you are figuratively living in totally different worlds. But it's because it's familiar, it's easy to keep investing in that relationship, even though it may not be serving you. And so maybe not completely cutting those relationships, but essentially spending a little bit less time we don't feel there is that alignment, I think, is key.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Some of my college drinking buddies are no longer aligned with my vision for my life. So
yeah. And just on that conversation with your CEO, Brad, were there any values that he espoused that I suppose different from your own or from your typical millennial?
I think one that he shared that was a newer perspective to me was the value that he put into further education. And so for myself, for example, I never really have put much thought into going back for any formal education. And I think that the education that I've perceived that I will continue to pursue are things that like paid trainings, going to events, listening to podcasts and audiobooks and reading books that are really aligned with my current path and vision. But he placed a really high value in pursuing his postgraduate degree. And that was one that was definitely different from a lot of the perspectives that you hear today, especially in the entrepreneurial community. So that was pretty interesting to talk through.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because my own perspective on that is, if the world outside your four walls, or the world outside the four walls of a college, are moving faster than the pace of change internally, then you essentially need to get a diversity of viewpoints and learn quickly. And oftentimes it's hard to reconcile what's happening in the world with the rate of change inside, say, a traditional college institution. That's why you have a lot of marketing degrees nowadays, say at a large university, whereby they're still teaching you, advertising on TV versus ClickFunnels and things of that persuasion. So I think I'm aligned with you on that one, Brad. But before we wrap up, I can't let you go without throwing you into our 3-question lightning round. Are you ready to rock and roll?
Let's make it happen.
Let's make it happen. So question number 1, Brad, is if you could work for any organization at any stage of the company lifecycle, who would it be and why?
So I think that maybe an unconventional answer, but the Oprah Winfrey show in the mid to late 80s, when Oprah was really coming to power, and being able to see firsthand her just monumental rise into stardom and the gigantic impact that she was able to have. I think it would be so cool to be able to be there for that and see what were the reasons behind the decisions she was making, and what were those key decisions that really led to the success that she had, because she's someone that I admire greatly, just based on that impact that she's had on the world and continues to have. And has just done it in a light of positivity, which is not always how people, especially in that time frame, really got attention. So I think that would be a really cool one to be in the passenger seat for.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic answer. And question number 2, Brad, is if you could ask anyone a question dead or alive, it might be Oprah Winfrey. Who would it be and what would you ask?
This one's probably a little more conventional, but I think it'd be Steve Jobs. And the question that I'd ask him would be around what his intentions were for the treatment of his people, because I think it's pretty well known at this point that while he was a great leader, just a visionary beyond the scope that we've seen in our generation, he had this way of just driving people crazy and really just being an asshole at times. But he is so smart that I can't imagine there wasn't really a specific intention around his approach there. And so I would love to talk to him about that.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And everything we hear today about leadership is, empower your people to make decisions, hire people smarter than you, get out of the way, which is very much the plenipotentiary model that Peter Thiel, Richard Branson all advocate. But Steve Jobs was very much on the other side of the spectrum when it came to that. And it was almost a micromanager in some ways. But, it worked for them. So, lucky last question, Brad. I mean, you've got your podcast, you've got your mastermind group, you are working full time at the Speedeon company. I mean, how do you effectively manage your time? Do you have any rituals or routines to help you keep performing at a top level?
Yeah, for me, it comes down to planning each week out. And so whether that be planning when podcast interviews are happening, when I'm going to be getting my workouts in, because that's definitely a key thing that I make sure to incorporate into my daily habits. Just having a good map of those things is really important to me at the beginning of the week to make sure I can fit it all in. And I don't always get as specific as I'd like to. I totally subscribe to the idea of time blocking and really having every portion of your day mapped out. But oftentimes the more realistic approach that I take is just knowing, okay, this evening I'm working on the podcast. This evening I have a workout or a dinner, or this day over lunch, I'm going to be working out, or this morning I'm going to be meeting with this key person. So it's just managing those things at the beginning of the week, because I don't want to get to Thursday and realize, oh crap, I haven't even been to the gym once. And then everything else starts to fall apart from there, for me at least. So it's just having that bird's eye view at the beginning of each week.
Yeah. Well, one of my past guests and prominent podcaster, Jordan Harbinger, basically said that if it's on the calendar, it gets done. If it's not, it's not going to get done. So I think that's a great tip. So if people want to learn more about you and listen to your podcast, they can head over to millennialmm.com. They can find out more about the mastermind there as well, if they happen to be in Cleveland, Ohio. Are there any other links you'd like to share with our audience?
No, I think that's basically it. You can find me at Brad Mulvey on the socials as well. But check out the podcast anywhere that you listen to this podcast, and you should be able to find it. So I really appreciate you having me on, Steve. This was a great honor and a really fun conversation.
Hi guys, Steve again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to receive a weekly email from me, complete with reflections, books I've been reading, words of wisdom, and access to blogs, ebooks, and more that I'm publishing on a regular basis, just leave your details at futuresquared.xyz/subscribe and you'll receive the very next one. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, take a minute to like, share, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It goes a long way to giving the podcast the exposure it needs so I can continue bringing you guests and conversations of the highest caliber. You can catch me on Twitter at Steve Glibeski and on Instagram at TheSteveGlibeski. Until next time.
Hasta la vista, baby.